welcome everyone for really day number 2. And yeah, I think it's very, very hard for me to kind of to describe the panel in a brief amount of words, because a lot of you guys I value on a really personal level. So I think whatever I'll say about your personal life doesn't do it justice. I want to start with Loretta, just because Loretta has enabled for me this really incredible start into 2020. We were at 4D on New Year's together, and she has published this book, The New Right Stuff, which is basically the new right stuff that it takes to be successful in space. And I had read it, I liked it. Then in the evening, we were on New Year's. I was fiddling around trying to get the music to work, totally stressing out, and of course there she appeared, like really just like this angel, totally like living up to all of the principles that she was discussing in this book, and just saved the day, made me a Spotify account, just saved the like totally saved the music situation. I know this sounds totally banal, but I think I've never really actually met someone that really embodies and is so authentic and has so much integrity as the person that they write about or that they would like to be. So I was incredibly impressed by Loretta stepping up, and this is really only, I think, tackling her kind of like her personal side. I think, apart from that, really she is quite an overachiever in any way possible. She is the founding astronaut with Virgin Galactic. She is the creator of Yuri's Night, which is an amazing night to celebrate space. And she is a leadership trainer on Space Kind, which is how can we use space to bring out the best in us. So she'll be doing a breakout on that. And I strongly encourage you to join that. It's super hands-on advice. After having the book, I actually distributed it to my sister, to Lou's sister, and to a lot of my friends. It's really, really good. Yeah, I'm very excited for that breakout. And I think she'll be leading a workshop on that, actually starting, I think, this week. So that's one thing to join. Then we have Mark Miller up next. And yeah, Mark, I think, has been with the Foresight community since its inception. He has written a few incredible, pioneering works, including the Agoric papers that, are now with the let's say, crypto commerce boom, kind of really getting into focus again. But, he's been thinking about kind of like decentralized coordination mechanisms for, his whole life, really. And many of the ideas that I think people think they come up with just recently have actually can be traced back to one of his earlier writings in one way or another. So I'm super happy to be collaborating with him on a book. We're writing a book together on intelligent voluntary cooperation, on ways in which we can increase voluntary cooperation instead of more centralized control mechanisms as a coordination strategy for resilient communities. And he will be on a panel discussion with Cory Doctorow from the EFF. And I think generally about the EFF, it's really one of my favorite organizations. I think Brad Templeton, who's on our board and who was on the EFF boards, always joke with me that I'm wearing my EFF sweater more than the Foresight sweater, and I should stop that. So I love that organization, and I think everyone who I've had the pleasure of meeting from that organization has been totally fantastic. So I'm super happy to have Cory here today. I haven't actually met you yet, but I've read a few of your items, including the sci-fi pieces, skimmed over them, and it looks totally fantastical. So I'm hoping you can share a little bit about that. Then next one up, we have Eric Rogers, who, yeah, I don't even know what to say. I think the first time I met you at an embassy salon and I walked into it, I think it was on the history of science or philosophy of science, and from a historic lens. And I was like, wait, is this human real? And so I was first, of course, blown away by your intellect, but then also valued as a really incredible human who, yeah, steps up incredibly consistently in ever more incredible ways. So you're going to talk about Beyond Return, which is a movement that you're involved in right now to kind of like take the current COVID crisis and do something with it that is a little bit different than the current structures that we are currently entangled in. Great. So now I'm realizing I forgot to say what I'm going to talk with Mark and Cory about. So Mark and Cory will remain here after the little introductions in the main room, and we're going to talk a little bit about how can we take restrictions away that prevent people from doing the right thing? How can we make it easy for them to step up to do the right thing? What has the open source community, in what ways have they stepped up with ventilators? Could we do something like a legal defense fund to support those people that have stepped up in incredible ways, but in legal gray areas? What is the right to repair? And is there something to be said for creating something like a whistleblower award to inspire people to step up when they can leak very relevant information for our public health? Great. So those are the 3 breakouts in a nutshell. I encourage you to check out the Google Doc, which Lou shared. It should be in the chat. And on that breakout, on that Google Doc, the collaborative note doc, you should have all of the information that you need for those sessions. And I encourage you to step up as a note taker and get quite involved. I'm going to open it up myself right now so we can take the first screening question for the panel. So let's see. Again, welcome everyone. I'm really glad that you could join on such short notice for some of you. So I want to start with the first question, and perhaps, let's see. The first question that we have on the Google Doc is, what made you step up during the crisis? So what I want to get at is a little bit, you know, there's always this moment between when is it really bad, and are there any bystanders? Like, when do you decide yourself, no, now is actually a time where I am stepping up. This is now a time where I'm being demanded. And what roadblocks do you think are in the way of others for stepping up and perhaps for having stepped up earlier? All right, so this is my question. And first one up, oh my God, I need to find a way to unmute you guys. First one up, we have Loretta. I'll unmute you now. Welcome.
Thanks, Alison. So I think it was March 12th. It was a Thursday. March 13th was the last day of school that my kids attended. And it was then that I sort of pulled myself with my bootstraps out of the mire and depression that I had sunk into for the previous 3 weeks and said, no, I have skills and I have talents that I can bring to this challenge and to this situation, and that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to serve, and I can't just have a pity party. I need to get out of my head and be of service. And so that's when I started looking for ways I could give back.
What did you do? What did you end up doing? And what do you think is holding others back from doing the same?
Well, if they're anything like me, it's the negative self-talk holds me back. It's either my dark side is depression, self-judgment, self-criticism, like, why am I procrastinating? What's wrong with me? Why can't I be more like my husband? And emotional, I call it emotional sobriety, emotional stability. I can get really angry or really reactive or really judgmental. I just ping to 10 really fast. And my husband's like super even keel, reliable, Marcus Aurelius, stoic. And so I'm like, oh, what's wrong with me? I'm so bad. So, that's one of the things that holds back is the negative self-talk. That spiral just goes down, and then I flame out. The other things that hold me back is just overwhelm. Like, who am I? What do I mean, surely Google's got this under control. Like, what could I do here in my house? I'm homeschooling 2 kids. Like, this is ridiculous. But when I started to get involved, like, one of the first things that came up was an opportunity to help a local COVID testing clinic, and like realizing they didn't have customers. I'm like, wait, everywhere I'm hearing that there's not enough testing, but you don't have customers? Like, that's crazy. And so just starting to get involved and starting to reach out and ask people, like, do you need testing? Does your nursing home need testing? And just starting to realize that nothing's happening anywhere.
Okay,
I was just like,
live, Stephen Kotler.
oh my gosh, that's crazy. So I realized that, one person in their living room can make a difference, just getting on the phone, just making a difference, just making stuff happen. So we have, each of us, especially here on this call, have incredible networks, have incredible resources, can bring more to bear. Just the people on this call could probably do more than most of the federal government right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think it's a little around coordination. So thank you so much. That was quite an inspiring flip. Then I would love to hear it from Eric next. Eric, I'm going to unmute you. What made you step up, and at what point, and why not earlier, and why then?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks so much for inviting me. Yeah, so this sort of idea of beyond return came out of the belief that like our existing institutions are just like proving how inadequate they are for the crises that we face, and a feeling that we need sort of new institutions. So the very name beyond return suggests that we can't just like fix the old institutional framework. We actually need new institutional frameworks. It's unlikely that we'll return to like the normal that we had before the crisis. We need something better. And so I think that crises are like a really important time to try to shift things, because you actually have agency in a crisis. When you're not in a crisis, like the amount of agency that it takes, that you need to leverage really to like shift anything is just like massive. Whereas when things are broken, like lots and lots of people and lots of institutions are like searching for answers. And so if you have new ideas about how we might do things, it's sort of fertile ground for sowing these. So.
All right, neat. Well, I think people can find more about Beyond Return in your session, because there's actually a lot of things to do. All right, next one up, we have Cory. Cory, it's really nice to meet you. You are wearing a fantastic shirt, and I'm going to mute you now. What made you step up?
Well, you know, I've been an activist for most of my life, and you know, the crisis did two things. One was that it rendered a lot more visible some of the stuff that we've been talking about for a long time, but that had been very slow moving. Like, for example, allowing monopolistic carriers to decide where our fiber goes has been like a manifestly bad idea for a long time, and people have been talking about it for a long time. But, you know, 15 years ago, when Finland declared broadband to be a human right, people made fun of them. And, you know, people like what's his name, Mr. 10,000 Hours, Malcolm Gladwell, published essays saying, you know, real things don't happen on the internet, real things happen in person. And you know, today here we are living with the results of deciding where the nervous system of the 21st century should go by means of allowing short-term, low capex focused monopolistic carriers to allocate our fiber. So, you know, the realization that on the one hand, we'd missed our opportunity, right? Like the time to have figured out a better fiber strategy was 20 years ago. But on the other hand, that we've never had a better opportunity really kind of made me want to dive in with both feet first. The other thing, of course, on a personal note, is that the way that I manage my own stress and anxiety is by working. So as soon as the crisis hit, my work schedule doubled.
Oh man, I can very much relate. Yeah, I can. Like when I started the Sanity Preservers, it was not a sane time for me.
Yeah.
two of those a day. It was kind of crazy. But yeah, thank you so much, Cory. You also wrote a few fantastic pieces, which I'm hoping that we can discuss on the panel. I can't wait. Yeah, and
I should say that the shirt actually is recognized as about 20 cars by ALPRs, by automatic license plate readers, and that the license plates spell out the Fourth Amendment.
Glorious. Okay, and do you make them yourself? Do you sell them? Do you make masks in that fashion?
It was someone's grad project. You can also get them as a dress. So if you look for ALPR sweater, I'll see if I can find it and put it in the chat.
Please do, please do. All right, next one up we have Mark. Mark, at what point did you decide to step in what capacity, and what is holding others back from stepping up?
So for me, there was a real turning point in this crisis when I read about the Solano patient. There was a patient in Solano, California, very early in the unfolding of this in the United States. He was transferred from one hospital to another after he was intubated. The hospital that received him was receiving him intubated with the right symptoms, with the indicative symptoms, and asked to get him tested. They rather than testing him, they asked for permission to test him. They were denied permission to test him. And then they came back and begged again for permission to test him. And finally it was granted and he was positive. Around the same time, Washington State had the outbreak in the nursing home. The only reason we knew at the time that we had infection in Washington State is one researcher there, one medical person there, who had asked for permission to test and was denied, and asked again a week later and was denied, and went ahead and tested anyway. The only reason we know about the infection in Washington State when we did was because of an explicit act of civil disobedience. And for me, I want to really emphasize civil disobedience as a form of activism. I look back on the history of the United States, and for all of the ups and downs in our political freedom, a lot of our greatest steps forward in freedom are due to civil disobedience. Of course, the civil rights movement with Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, the burning of draft cards to end the Vietnam War, and then the ending of the crypto export controls in the 90s was largely driven by civil disobedience that I remember very directly because I took part in it. And the contrast is that when I see people in the medical world right now knowing what needs to be done and not doing it, and when I talk to them about why, one of the things that really stands out to me as a cultural difference between the computer field and the medical field is this culture of permission. In the computer field, people who know what needs to be done just go out and do it and don't ask anybody's permission. People in the medical field always have to ask permission first, and there's this real culture of fear. And I think part of that is licensing. I'm a recognized professional expert in my field of software engineering, but there's no license to practice software engineering. No matter who I piss off, they can't take away my license to practice software engineering. That's not true for a tremendous amount of activity in the medical world. So I think that the way to address that on the margins is the legal defense fund that Allison mentioned. With civil disobedience, there is strength in numbers. At the margin, the existence of a legal defense fund, like we've seen with free speech with the EFF, at the margin helps people courageously step up and do what they know is right, knowing that somebody has their back. And there's safety in numbers, so the more you can create a perception that other people are going to step up, the more each of us individually is willing to step up.
All right, great. It's like a cascade of people doing the right thing. Yeah, I mean, that would be better than a race to the bottom, which is, what is often the case. But how low is it anyways? Okay, great. So Mark has already, I think, kicked us off with like what I wanted to ask as the next question. This is like, the Foresight salons do get watched a lot. So this is a really good time and actually already pointing out, I think one meta strategy of making sure that people do the right thing is to point to heroes and to really celebrate them. And I think Mark has done that to some extent. We're going to do that tomorrow again. We're going to talk about how can we create, for example, a Dr. Lee celebration day tomorrow. But I would love to hear from you guys. Is there anyone that's on your mind that you would like to point out to now and just kind of thank them publicly so we don't forget their services? Loretta, does someone come to mind for you? Oh, wait 1 second. I'm going to mute you. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so a friend of mine, she's a nurse, Diana Canturena. She's organizing something called cultivatingself.org, which is helping nurses deal with the burnout and the fatigue of being on the front lines and using mindfulness and meditation and everything they can for their nurses union to support the nurses. And it's a very sort of unsung hero kind of piece that I think is being overlooked that I wanted to celebrate.
Yeah, I think mental health for those that are at the front lines is really not to be missed. Okay, Eric, is there anyone that comes to your mind? You are surrounded by those, I'm sure. I'm going to unmute you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of people doing a lot of great things, and actually the people who come to mind lately, just again and again and again, are the folks who do that like truly essential work that's keeping us all alive right now. Like there's a massive industrial class in China producing this stuff that even as we're like throwing all these sort of political like slurs and racism at the Chinese right now, like they are producing so much of the stuff that we need to stay alive, to stay safe. I think we shouldn't forget that. I think about Amazon workers who are like bringing stuff to those of us who are sheltering in place, and that's not to be forgotten. And also agricultural workers who are producing all the food that we eat. And there's a major crisis in food production right now. And it's something I think we should all be really worried about, that the people who produce our food are getting sick and they're not able to continue to do that work. And a lot of plants are shutting down, and the impacts that that's going to have on the food supply are really terrifying. And I think these kinds of moments make us really aware of the people that we depend on, like literally vitally depend on for our material subsistence. So I'm really grateful to those people.
Yeah, I think this is a fantastic segue into Cory's work with the right to repair. I think, much of that, is, or you focus on that was, to also enable farmers to repair their own tools. And I think that, that's something that is often underlooked. So I'm going to unmute you. Who do you want to thank?
I second those thankful statements about agricultural workers and other people on the front lines. It would be useful maybe to talk briefly about right to repair here. Is this a good time to do that?
For sure, yeah, mention
Great.
it.
So, the interesting thing about right to repair is that there is no legal prohibition on repair, right? No, Congress never enacted a rule that said you may not repair your stuff. In fact, quite the opposite. We've historically had the idea that if you buy a thing, you own that thing. Moreover, to the extent that Congress has ever weighed in on repair, they did so in the 70s, and they passed a law that said, even if you try to fix it yourself or take it to an independent repairer, the manufacturer is not allowed to void your warranty. That the right to independent repair is a consumer right that trumps any kind of contractual consideration about warranties. But over the years, what we've seen is that as industries have concentrated, they have been able to agree on a single negotiating position for their lobbying, and also to have the excess rents from their monopolies to turn that into effective lobbying strategies that has created a de facto ban, not just on repair, but on a whole suite of otherwise legitimate activities. So, you have old laws like the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which in 1998 was passed, and it made it illegal to bypass a copyright law. That wasn't a big deal until there was copyrighted software in everything from, printer cartridges to, pet food, automated pet feeders. And what manufacturers have figured out is that if they design a system so that reconfiguring it for independent repair or for any purpose that benefits you at the expense of their shareholders requires bypassing one of these copyright protections, that they can conjure up a kind of new statute out of nothing that you could call felony contempt of business model, where anything that involves bypassing a copyright law is a felony. And therefore, if you want people to be forced to use your things in certain ways, the things you make in certain ways, just make it so they have to remove the lock. So this has come up a lot in medical contexts. It's also come up in agricultural contexts. Farmers have been told for many years that they don't really own their tractors, despite having spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on it. And it does point to the real problem with surveillance capitalism. You have this old saw that if you're not paying for the product, you're the product. What you see with farmers is that even though they pay for the product, pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for the product, they are still the product, that they are still expected to create a stream of payments to the firm for authorized service rather than service on the farm, as has been done since the first forge was, installed next to a barn on a farm thousands of years ago. And what it really says is not that if you're not paying for the product, you're the product, but rather, irrespective of whether you pay for the product, if the manufacturer doesn't have to worry about competition, then they can suborn regulators and turn you into the product. And it doesn't matter how much you pay.
Is there any specific hero in that project that you'd like to point to right now?
Well, I mean, there's that Italian bloke who 3D printed a ventilator piece, and there are the folks at iFixit who are gathering up and publishing service manuals for medtech equipment. There's a gentleman in Tasmania who for years has maintained a one-person illegal repository of service manuals for medtech, who's now passed that baton over to iFixit. All of them represent people who are willing to do a very brave thing. which is to admit in public the thing that they've done in private all along, right? That we hear people say, well, how can you allow technicians in a hospital to tinker with ventilators? Shouldn't that be the domain of the manufacturer? And the reality is that people in hospitals have been hacking their ventilators forever, because if it's a choice between your patient dying and trying something that might save their life, people who work in hospitals take the chance. And, that can be dangerous, right? Because in the absence of service manuals, in the absence of third-party parts, in the absence of a hotline you can call up to say, I'm about to attempt a little MacGyverism here to see if I can save someone's life, you are taking an unnecessary risk. The answer to all of that is not to say, all right, then, well, the people at the coalface are no longer allowed to do whatever it takes to save their patients. The answer is to say that the people who have it in their power to make those desperate attempts to save patients more likely to bear fruit have both a moral and a legal obligation to do so. And if we're not prepared to impose the obligation on them to do so, at least let us clarify that they don't have the legal right to stop other people from trying to step up and make those desperate chances more likely to succeed.
Amen, Cory. All right, very nicely said. Okay,
I'd like to add one particular thing.
Yes, Mark and Cory, we're going to stay in our session and we're going to talk about this specific topic right now. I just want to be very mindful that we have Loretta and Eric, who both have like really quite insane breakout rooms. So I think now is a really, really good time to if Lou, you could maybe share the 2 links to the breakout rooms too. And please, no one leave before I can. Oh, they're done. Okay, but please don't leave yet. I want to say one thing. So there's Zoom room. The normal Zoom feature doesn't allow you to break people, to allow people to decide where they want to go. So I would have to force you to go somewhere. I don't want to do that. So we created 2 extra Zoom rooms. And so click on in a second, not yet, click on the link where you want to go to. If you want to go with Loretta and do the space kind training and get an appetite for that for the next 15 minutes, go there. If you'd like to go with Eric, to get an idea of what is beyond return doing, how can you plug in right now to help, then go to Eric's breakout room. If you'd like to talk about further about legal defense funds, potentially whistleblower awards, and other ways that we can support people that are currently stepping up to do the right thing, then remain here on this panel. And please, everyone, come back here before, let's say, at 5 to noon, so we can do a little report out and share. And I really, 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 really encourage you. This is the time where you can step up and do the right thing. Contribute to the notes. Seriously, though, please contribute to the notes. Make this a collaborative experiment. All of the session notes, please take the notes with you. All of the sessions have a little section that says session notes for collaborative note taking. I'm going to highlight it for you in yellow. Please take notes there all together so other people can benefit from your session too. And I think we're going to record all of them. All right, with that being said, I will see you again here at, wait 1 second. Okay, well, I will see you here again at 5 to noon. So just click on the main Foresight, on the main bit.ly/Foresight Meet link at 5 to 12. Okay, I'll see you all here. Bye-bye, everyone. And everyone who wants to stay on this panel, please remain here. Everyone who'd like to go with Loretta, there's a link posted in the Zoom room. Everyone who'd like to go with Eric, there's a link posted in the Zoom room. And Mark and Cory, are you still here? Cory, yes, I see you. Great. Okay, cool. So let's see. Okay, we still have a few folks here. So I got a request, what is the session if you want to stay here? The session if you want to stay here is the session, you can look at it from the Google Notes doc. I encourage you to click on the Google Doc again, go through the sessions. Here we're going to talk about how can we best make it possible to remove the barriers to incentivize individuals to do the right thing. Okay, great. For everyone who would like to go with Loretta to learn about a culture, to learn about how to develop a space kind culture and like have this really hands-on leadership training, please go into Loretta's room, it's in the chat. And for everyone who'd like to have the session on Beyond Return, Rebuilding an Extraordinary New Society by Agoric Rogers. Please go there. Great. Okay, we have another 15 minutes here with the remaining participants. Thank you so much for staying. Great, so we're going to dive right into the questions. You can follow the questions along at the doc, and I encourage you to also ask here in the chat, and then we can try to source it quite openly. Great. So, Mark, you wanted to say you had a direct point in response to Cory's point.
It was just a particular point thing to enhance what Cory was saying. There's one particular example that I really like, which is somebody did a jailbreak on a BiPAP machine. And Brad Templeton's been pointing out that you take a look at what's needed for a low-end ventilator, and a BiPAP machine is not a low-end ventilator, but a lot of what you need to build a low-end ventilator is in a BiPAP machine if you can reprogram it. So I don't know that anybody has succeeded at doing that, but BiPAP machines are so plentiful and so many people would be willing to donate them if they could be made into ventilators. So I think that's a very nice specific example of that kind of DIY spirit. And the fact that they needed to jailbreak them, the fact that the manufacturer did not take the chance on enabling people to hack it on their own is, I think, indicative of part of this whole FDA licensing of medical equipment culture of fear.
All right, thank you so much. Cory, do you have an immediate comeback for that? And maybe in the comeback, you rather than just piling up more complaints, what can we do about this right now? What is there to be done? How can people get involved? Are there any projects out there that we can support, or does it require our own, i.e. a legal defense fund?
So I am interested in, I have no expertise, none of the expertise needed to bring together a legal defense fund, but I would very much like to catalyze that. Mm-hmm. From the last Foresight meeting, a lawyer who attended has already contacted me, and I intend to follow up. But yeah, I think that actually forming a legal defense fund to do this is something I think we should do.
So I think that historically we didn't have to worry about this stuff primarily because it was hard for industries to get together and collaborate on these projects to repurpose existing rules or create new rules that stand in the way of adversarial interoperability, which is what Mark's just been discussing. This is when you modify an existing product or service to do things that the manufacturer actually disfavors, to do things the manufacturer doesn't want, despite the manufacturer's objections. And with the growth of things like software patents, novel copyright theories like the API copyrights pursued by Oracle in their case against Google and so on, what we've seen is that even things that seem relatively benign or well settled or off to one side can be repurposed to join this thicket that stops adversarial interoperability. And so this points to a kind of three-pronged strategy to restore the right of individuals and firms, cooperatives, and other market entrants to alter the technology around them to suit their purposes and to assert their technological self-determination. So the first is to fight the fires where we see them, right? We need to make sure that Oracle doesn't set a precedent in Google v. Oracle that makes APIs copyrightable, and so on, right? EFF is actually suing the US government to overturn some of these laws. We're representing the cryptographer Matthew Green and the hardware hacker Andrew Bunny Huang in a lawsuit to have Section 12.1 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that bans breaking copyright locks declared unconstitutional. And that lawsuit is moving, it's slow, but it's a thing that's happening. Then the next thing is the idea of having some kind of affirmative defense. So at EFF, we're noodling with the idea of something like a whistleblower's defense that you see in the finance sector, where there's a whistleblower defense that says, notwithstanding any of your contractual obligations, your the non-disclosure agreements and so on, it is not an offense and cannot be an offense for you to disclose illegal activity, right? And so you could imagine a corollary to that in the realm of adversarial interoperability that says, like, notwithstanding any law, be it patent, copyright, trade secrecy, contractual laws, anti-hacking laws, and so on. It is never an offense to, on behalf of a legitimate user, add a legitimate function, and still invokes the courts. The courts will have to decide who's a legitimate user and whether the function that's been added to the existing product or service is legitimate. But that gets the courts to answer the important question, which is the legitimacy question, instead of the procedural question, like, did you violate a patent or did you bypass a copyright law? So it starts to look a lot more like fair use and a lot less like, you know, patents. And then the last piece is the structural reforms, right? Because this is only really possible because of market concentration, right? And without market concentration, you would have too many defectors for there to be this convergence on a single set of interpretations of existing law, like software patents or what have you. You know, people got really upset when they saw the leaders of the tech industry around a table with Donald Trump and Trump Tower after the election. Mostly, I think, because they were upset that he was meeting with Donald Trump, and I agree that that's upsetting. But for me, the most upsetting thing about it was that all the leaders of tech fit around a single table, right? That should really make us worried. And so to reinvigorate that, we need to start thinking about the traditional tools for preventing monopolization, the tools that predate the Reagan years when we started to reform monopoly law. So that would be things like merger scrutiny. And right now you see Google about to buy Fitbit. So anyone who decided that they wanted to have a fitness tracker but not opt into Google's data collection is about to be retrospectively opted into Google's data collection. You have major mergers, so like the T-Mobile merger that was just approved, that never should have been approved, reducing the number of phone companies from 4 to 3. And then you have the erosion of structural separation, or the elimination of structural separation. So this week, the Wall Street Journal ran a deeply reported expose based on insider reports that says that Amazon has lied when they've said that they don't examine the proprietary data of the firms that use their platform to figure out how to enter the market with lookalike products that exploit and erode the margins that these nascent competitors have. And so you could imagine, as a structural fix, restoring some of those traditional contours of antitrust, the merger scrutiny, the acquisition scrutiny, and the restoration of structural separation that prohibits platform owners from competing with platform users.
All right, thanks, man. That's a laundry list. Mark, what do you have to say?
So I want to disagree, actually, with much of what Cory was just saying, while certainly also agreeing with a lot of it. I think that the market concentration is genuinely as damaging as Cory says. The concentration of political power, of power in institution that has the ability to kill us, is also quite damaging. I would say at least as damaging and more damaging. And a lot of what sustains the concentration of markets is what's come to be known as crony capitalism, is these guys being mutually influencing of each other. So to appeal to the greater and corrupted concentrator as the antidote to the other concentrators, I think is something that is part of the EFS mission, and I applaud it, but I don't have much hope that that's where the real reform is going to come from. I think the real reform is going to come, again, from the civil disobedience, from the independent, compete with these things by building credible, decentralized technological alternatives that they cannot shut down. And to the extent that Cory and the lobbying effort of the EFF succeeded at running interference for that, that's great. But I think the real reform is going to come from actually competing, not simply trying to clear a legal pathway to allow that. Do it whether you're allowed to or not.
Cory, any reply?
Well, I mean, we obviously have spent a lot of time sticking up for people who are engaged in that kind of activity, and our opinion on tech companies more broadly is that if you've got your users back, we've got your back, irrespective of size. And so, whether it's big firms or small firms or individuals, we've always had their back. I favor, I think that the problem with this, like, which tactics should we use, is that I think it misunderstands the role of tactics, which is that when you have tactics, what you do is you explore whichever one gives you the most freedom of action, at any given point, and you use that tactic until you run at a headroom, right? And then you try a different one. So, you know, Larry Lessig defines these 4 broad tactics that are available to people who want to change the world: code, law, markets, and norms, right? What's socially acceptable, what's legally permissible, what's financially prudent, and what's technologically possible. And, you know, the reason that you get into these impasses of like, we should use the law, no, we should use technology, no, we should use markets, is because all of them sometimes work, right? Speaking as like a very bad driver who moved to Southern California 5 years ago and can't parallel park for toffee, I can tell you that a lot of the times you have to crank the wheel really hard in one direction just to gain a few millimeters of space to get into that space. But then you have to turn it in the opposite direction to get a few millimeters more. And, you know, if we can make if we can prevent the legal challenge that arises, say, out of Google the Oracle, right? Or if we can restore the adversarial interoperability that historically caused people to found firms like Facebook to compete with entrenched incumbents like MySpace, then we can open up the space for more technology development, for more markets, but also for more normative interventions, where we can go from this idea that the company that sells you the phone should have the right to decide whose apps you install, and change that to, what do you mean? That's like the company that sold me the toaster telling me whose bread I can toast. That's outrageous, right? And if we can make that normative shift, then there's a market space. Then, you know, entrepreneurs can go to venture capitalists and say, I would like some money for an alternative app store.
I think that Cory and I are actually largely in agreement. And in fact, my advocacy of a legal defense fund is doing exactly the thing that I seem to be trying to de-emphasize. The only point that I'm making is that we shouldn't be too hopeful that these attempts to free things through government lobbying is going to be the major factor, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't passionately continue to try to do that and to try to open up the space for the other tactics. I agree with all that.
Okay, Mark, so you said that you're not quite sure of how to go about setting a fund like that up. What do you need from people? So if anyone was interested in intervening, what skills do you need? Who should contact you? And you know, if they would be interested in getting their hands dirty.
So the main thing I would love is somebody that has any more expertise than I do, who is willing to take the lead on this, because my ideal role here is to just catalyze it and then mostly step out of the way and help from the side, because I really don't have the expertise and I'm far too busy on other things. So I really would love volunteers for that.
So if anyone here hasn't found their COVID pet project yet, this is a really good one. And I think one thing that I want to come back to related to the whistleblower award that you mentioned, Cory. So I know from, let's say, like trusted information that the BOP currently isn't doing most of the things that they claim to be doing on their websites to hold prisoners safe. So one thing, and one of the people that are suffering from that are obviously the warden and guards, because they are also, you know, in kind of like a little bit of a difficult situation, because they have to go in and out of those prisons all day long. And the BOP is not, you know, distributing any of the masks, or like most of the masks that they're claiming to. They're not doing the social distancing and so on and so forth. So it would be a good time, I think, and from their BOP website text, I can kind of like tell that the people that they're currently communicating with as their staff, they're very defensive, and they're saying like, we do everything possible to keep our staff healthy, but the BOP website is usually for people from inmates anyway. So all of that tells me that there's currently the wardens or the staff aren't feeling safe. The BOP isn't really living up to the things that they claim that they do. So there would be a really good thing to build a whistleblower awards for people who are staff at prison to tell to kind of tell the tale. I'm wondering what you both think about that.
So I think that a reward is not necessarily the thing that keeps people from coming forward. It's not that no one's paying people whose lives are in danger to speak the truth, and that's why they're not speaking it. They're not speaking out of fear of retaliation, right? So it's not that you need whistleblower awards, you need whistleblower protection, right?
Well, that would be a legal defense fund.
Yeah. So actually, this is a great example of the multiple tactics. We definitely need to lobby for better protection for whistleblowers, for protection of whistleblowers across more areas. But ask yourself, who has done more for whistleblowers? All of the lobbying for whistleblower protection laws or WikiLeaks? And how much legal protection did this lobbying get to Julian Assange or Chelsea Manning or Snowden, or Reality Winner? We don't have a chance of whistleblower protection laws where they're needed most, but technologists building technology have succeeded at providing a measure of whistleblower protection. Once again, I'm not really disagreeing with the lobbying. We need to pursue both courses, but I want to make sure that people inclined towards political activism remember the effectiveness of building things. Back in the cypherpunk days, we had a slogan that I still very much believe in: cypherpunks write code.
So I agree that the power that things that are technologically possible are things that people can do, right? And things that are not technologically possible can't be done, right? And so expanding the realm of technological possibility is really important. But I think that I am skeptical that we can build these permanent, stable demimondes protected by cryptography, in which you are in which you don't have a responsive and legitimate state that protects your rights to protect you. Instead, what you have is unbreakable cryptography, because your attacker in that world has all the advantages, right? They have to wait for your OPSEC to slip once, right? For you to have a single bug in your code, or a single confidant you shouldn't have trusted, or a single camera that you miss when you're typing in your password, or whatever it is. You have to never make a mistake. And moreover, if they are determined to get you, you know, as we see in like the Snowden doc, for example, where he's got that towel over his head while he's typing in his password, you know, they can run 3 shifts of people to watch what you're doing and try to find the moment that you lapse. There's only one of you, right? You don't get to spell off to another you when you're tired and exhausted and cranky. So over time, it seems inevitable, as we see with Julian, as we see with Reality, as we see with Chelsea, as we see with Ed, you know, over time, the technology is a necessary but insufficient step to keep you safe. And I've come to feel like the role of the technology is to establish the space in which you can demand legitimacy of a state, not to replace the legitimacy of a state.
All right, thank you. Mark, we are now at 58, and our other panelists just made it into the session. So welcome back. Welcome back, Eric and Loretta. Thank you so much. I want to give the stage first to Loretta. Do you want to share a little bit what your group did? Are you here already? I'm going to search for you and unmute you. Great. Loretta, are you here? Yes. Yeah. Hi.
Yeah, we had a lovely conversation. People were talking about how they feel called to contribute, and how we could use space to inspire people to be their best, and also how we could use the resources of space responsibly and shift to that bigger perspective of a planetary perspective and a 100-year or 1,000-year or 10,000-year perspective that helps people learn to be more responsible, and that the space community and culture could help be that role model, and that it all has to start from us as individuals. We have to be that change for ourselves, and then spread it from there.
Wow, thank you so much. I just posted your book, the Amazon book, in the group chat. Like, honestly, like I'm not often doing that, but it's really kind of changed my life. Like really, at least changed this year, and as well for my siblings. It's like a super actionable, practical guide. And yeah, I would strongly recommend you search it out. Loretta, I think, is also starting a workshop, an online workshop for the space community specifically. Is that correct?
Yeah, I just put a link for that as well. If anyone wants to, starting on Star Wars Day, I couldn't let that day go by without doing something. So we're going to launch.
No, because I also really wanted to have you for the session tomorrow, which is on, how can we create global prices? But in the absence of that, can you share a few things about like how the hell did you start Yuri's Night? Like, what made you start that? How did that become such a like international festival? Because I think this is exactly what we're trying to do tomorrow. So while you're here, please share.
Thank you. Well, I realized that we had a Soviet. I was inspired by the movie 2010, where the Soviet and the American crews have to work together at Jupiter. And when I found out that the Soviet anniversary of the first human in space and the American anniversary of the first space shuttle flight were the same day, April 12th, I realized that I wanted to use that day to celebrate the power of space to bring humanity together. So April 12th every year is Yuri's Night. We do parties around the world under space shuttles. It's open source, free. Everyone can do their own, like St. Patrick's Day. And this year we did a great online event with an incredible lineup of musicians and astronauts because everyone was home. So you can check that out. I'll put the link to that as well. It was a 5-hour event. It was really fun.
Gwen, yeah, that's exactly what what we're hoping to create, and I think something like that, like a celebratory moment to celebrate this, the heroes of this crisis, is very much on game with that. Thank you so much for joining, Loretta. Yeah, I strongly encourage you to check out her workshop. Next one up, we have Eric. Eric, what did you discuss in your session? Please let me unmute you now.
Yeah, okay, it was short and sweet. I feel like we barely got to hear from anyone, but I was just pitching that we probably need better institutions if we expect to have better citizens, and that will necessarily be something of a sort of normative project. Like, we need new institutions in which we can have better norms so that people can participate in these as good citizens. And we touched very lightly on the question of the duty of care that is extended to citizens, and the question of how do you build sort of high trust communities while at the same time navigating sort of exclusion, and that sort of building around this sort of tension between exclusion and high trust that I think any community that tries to have better norms faces. And then we talked a bit about intentional communities and how they have seen a sort of fluorescence of extending care beyond their sort of the household boundaries that people live in, because there is sort of a social and material abundance in communal settings. And then we talked about this beyond return movement that we're working on, which is trying to build institutions that do a better job basically than the state and the market in this time of crisis. So sort of formalizing some of what's happening in mutual aid groups and so forth that have picked up the slack of a sort of dysfunctional state and marketplace. And yeah, we talked, I think the very last thing we talked about was how people could get involved with that project.
How can they get involved?
You can email me, you can go to our Facebook page. You can also we have a Twitter account which posts basically daily things that you can do to support this movement. So we'll route you to one of the to-dos that our affiliated organizations and sort of pods are asking for help on.
Neat. I think Lou just shared the link to that in the chat. So thanks for that. And you said you barely covered anything. It's also you covered a lot. Thank you so much for joining, Eric. And next one up, we have Mark over here. Do you want to summarize what you talked about? Let me unmute you. Oh my God. Now instead of unmuting you, I put out your video. Glorious. Yeah.
Okay, I'm visible again. So Cory and I went back and forth, kind of vigorously agreeing with each other, but coming from two different emphases. I hope Cory agrees with that as the overall summary. Cory, being at EFF, is very naturally emphasizing the lobbying of government and the attempt to influence law to create a world that's more free. And I certainly wish him luck. I think that's a great thing to do. I support that. My suggestion of a legal defense fund fits with that. But my emphasis is that we shouldn't have too much hope that the lobbying of a big central monopoly power is the right answer to other big central monopoly powers. And that instead, well, not instead, but in addition, but my emphasis is build things and compete with them. whistleblower example, I think, was a very clear one. Cory supports more laws to protect whistleblowers and to protect them across more areas of society. I completely support that. But WikiLeaks did more to enable whistleblowing than all the laws, and there's no chance that any whistleblowing law is going to protect Snowden or Assange or Manning or Reality Winner. So cypherpunks write code. Activists, please build as well as lobby.
Thank you so much. And Cory, I will definitely give you the last chance. Do you want to correct anything that Mark said?
Yeah, I think I'm generally in sync with Mark. I would say, and I'm sort of contractually obliged to add that there already is an organization that takes public funds and defends people who get in trouble, particularly around people whose trouble might set a bad precedent or whose deliverance from trouble might set a good one. It's the Electronic Frontier Foundation. It's 30 years old. You know, I agree with Mark that civil disobedience was very important in legalizing cryptography, but what actually legalized cryptography was our lawsuit on behalf of Daniel Bernstein, in which the Ninth Circuit affirmed that that code is a form of speech protected by the First Amendment. So, you know, we're a nonprofit. We obviously are struggling with all the same problems everyone else is, and EFF.org is where to go if you'd like to help support our work.
So Cory, this is wonderful. I interpreted the mandate or the mission of EFF perhaps too narrowly. If EFF can serve as a legal defense fund for these medical activity purposes, I'm much happier just folding my advocacy for this into EFF.
Yeah,
all right, thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Guys, thank you. Okay, great. Hey, I can't thank you all enough. It seems like that there is a lot of following up for participants to do. And, you know, I think if we meet here again in a week from now, no one has an excuse if they haven't gotten involved in one way or another, either by, you know, I think really like creating themselves into, you know, like someone who can lead with integrity. And I think, I mean, Loretta's workshop was like a way to do that. Join the Beyond Return movement from Eric. Follow the EFF, contact Mark for, I think, all things cyberpunk. And I'm hoping that I'll see many of you tomorrow here, where we're going to talk about how can we celebrate specific heroes, like, for example, Dr. Lee. How can we actually get some global rituals going? Is that something we can do? And yeah, I want to thank the speakers now, because I'm very, very mindful of your time. That said, whoever wants to stay on, we're going to now do a little bit of participant sharing and on bits of hope that participants may or may not have filled in their spreadsheet. Yesterday, it was quite fantastic. We had Brian here share on a project that he's doing with collecting different sounds across the globe and showing them to folks. So that's very optional. I want to thank you so much to our speakers for staying over time. Eric is going into his ball pit right now. I can tell he's taking us into his ball pit. Okay, thank you so much. Have a lovely, lovely day. I'm hoping I'll see many of you tomorrow, and whoever wants to stay on and do some kind of like informal sharing is very welcome too. But for now, I'll close the official part of this. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye. Lovely. Okay, so for whoever stayed on, rewind. We're now going to go into the social bit, which is on the collaboration spreadsheet. Here you go. I'll share it. Please, if you maybe you already did that. Yeah. Oh, great. Thank you, Lou. I totally forgot to do like our own little bit of fundraising call. Obviously, we're also a nonprofit trying to do the best we can to make sense of this crisis. And I think, fundraising is really freaking hard. It's not something that's like fun to do, and I think especially if you try to coordinate many different actors and projects that actually make sense of this crisis, then you're always in this kind of coordination space by which you continuously showcase other efforts, and they are all really, really, really freaking important. I do think of Fawcett as a little bit of like a community hub and, a project that is trying to coordinate other efforts from this community and hopefully a more global community. So, if you value the work that we're doing, if you think that we can help and support your work, then Lou put a link in there to donate to us as well. Thanks, Lou, for reminding me. All right, with that being said, if you want to open up the Google spreadsheet, then on that participant tab, you can go on Bit of Hope. And I'm going to share my screen again just so you know how you may want to do that, because the spreadsheet is still a little confusing, but we're wiggling our way around it. So on the spreadsheet that I shared, if you click on Collaborate, you can put in your name, you can put in your affiliation, your email, link to relevant work, and then you can put in your Bit of Hope. And we can scroll through that list, and it can be a poem, it can be a song, it could be a painting, it could be anything. And please say now in the chat if you have put something in there, or if you haven't and would like to share it with us now. This is the time to share something that's maybe not a heady thought, but that is something that's inspiring on a different level. So anyone in the chat, is there anyone who'd like to share? Please write in the chat your name and we'll call on you. Is there any bit? Okay, let me do another call. Is there anything that tremendously inspires you that better worlds are possible? This could be a poem, it could be a song, it could be a painting, it could be anything. Okay, great. Teresa Cruz, amazing. I will unmute you now. Be ready.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Where are you from?
I'm originally from Colombia. I'm currently living in Los Angeles, but I would actually be relocating back to Colombia, hopefully by the end of this year. I'm setting up a strategic foresight and futures think tank in Colombia with the hope of having reach throughout Latin America. And the idea is, what Eric was talking about in terms of developing new norms and new institutions. Especially within Colombia, you have a 50-year-old internal conflict because of the NARC and paramilitaries. And so there's a tremendous level of distrust within institutions, government. And so I think in terms of hope, I think what Colombian citizens have been able to achieve within just a month of being on lockdown has been quite incredible to observe, just because you see the solidarity of citizens staying at home. And I think that has been pretty incredible, because if you were to have told me that the city of Bogota would be on lockdown with nobody in the streets, I would have said there's no way. I mean, just in general, Colombians, love to be out and about celebrating. So I think to see that solidarity also provides hope for citizens, for them to see that they can play a pivotal role in creating a new society, especially when, there's so much distrust with Duque, the current president. So it's also been interesting to see how local governments have really stepped in, and local organizations to, to provide food and supplies to a lot of people that have lost their sustenance and their way of, and their living, and working. And so I just think it's been very hopeful. You have examples like Brazil and Mexico that have not stepped up in many ways for their citizens. So I think from the perspective of Colombia, it's been really interesting to see hope in a hopeful way, how this is creating kind of a new movement. So that makes me hopeful.
That's fantastic. I remember I worked in the government in Medellin, and you have the Metro Cable that goes. And I think Medellin was voted Innovative City of the Year 2011. And people would, they would kill you if you would put your chewing gum anywhere in the Metro Cable. Like, it's a really strong community record. I totally admired that. Like, there's always a lot of solidarity in that city.
I'll have to send you a link later. They're posting pictures of the metro in Medellin, because that's where I'm from. And they're showing how they're placing, the kind of the feet marks. So where you need to be standing, where you should not be sitting. And Medellin is exemplary from that perspective of respect for, things that are utilized by society. So it's just really interesting to see how other kind of larger cities, like my parents live in Cartagena. So it's really interesting to see how different communities and cities are also linking up with each other. just because they're not trusting in President Duque, so they're kind of taking it into their own hands.
Oh man, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I really welcome that.
It's amazing.
Awesome. I hope to see you again soon. Ed, I'm gonna unmute you next.
Thank you very much. I put earlier in the chat, way up toward the beginning, which is probably a little hard to find at the moment, there's a group called radish.org that has been doing also a series of large video meetings like this. They started out that had meetings every Friday. They were 24 hours a day. They may still be having those. I haven't seen them recently. They have one going on simultaneously right now that started at the same time as yours, 11 a.m. Pacific time, and will go till 7 this evening. This session on Tuesday is about solutions. It's a little bit of a contrast. My experience of this group and that group are that this group is more intellectual, academic. They are more emotional, spiritual in terms of where they're coming from. But I think there is a real overlap in terms of potential and desire to make things happen. And they are also grabbing a lot of other people. I will eventually put up their information into the spreadsheet. I didn't want to do that while I was attempting to have one ear on this, answer the door and the telephone and a few other things at the moment, and still haven't had lunch yet as it gets to be 3 o'clock. One other quick thing, and that is that I just took
What did you ask, Loretta?
Just what the name of the group Ed was referring to.
The website is radish.org, like the vegetable, radish.org. Again, they are going on today. I put in the chat their link to today's event, which goes to 7 p.m. tonight. And on the site, you will see more. There are some, very broad, creative, dynamic thinkers talking about essentially how do we link together to create a global intelligence via our linked intelligences, and taking things like the transcript of these meetings. There's now an AI that Zoom has that will be creating transcripts that's going to be part of their service. The folks at Radish are talking about mining the transcripts for common threads with another AI in order to tap that global intelligence. So to use all of what we're doing, but to automate the process of gathering this data. So some real broad conceptual.
Oh my God. I'm amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. I wrote their message, their website down. I'm going to reach out to them. It's amazing. It's so interesting. You think that, you think you're coordinating, like it was the same with Get Us PPE efforts. There were so many efforts popping up, and then there was Get Us PPE that coordinated those efforts that were popping up. So it's really cool to see how it's like from the bottom up, and then people find each other. It's amazing. Yeah.
Two other things quickly.
Okay, make it quick, please, so we can also.
One other is I'm working on a project to make renewable energy possible around the globe by storing hydrogen in a liquid hydrocarbon. A friend of mine has patented the process. He's former chief research scientist at Air Products and Chemicals. He's American Chemical Society Chemist of the Year. He has about 40 patents. There are a group of us working to get it out of the lab into the world and make it broadly available. I'm listening to Cory and others about how we put this out there in a way that many people can share. We're working to construct a blockchain-based LLC under Vermont legislation that allows that, with an aim of having that in place by the fall. We're in contact with attorneys up there and going to contract with them to help us walk through that process. Finally, I just looked at your website for a donation. I just wanted to ask, can I use PayPal? Because I just got a refund from another conference and I wanted to pass it on to you guys and make sure I did a commercial for you before I left.
Yes, please. That would be amazing and much appreciated. You're very sweet.
Can I use PayPal?
You can use PayPal.
All right. That'll happen
Thank
soon.
you so much, Ed. All right. It was very lovely to hear from you. Okay, next one up, we have Arun, please. Arun, let me find you. Okay, you're unmuted.
Hi, Allison. How are you?
Great.
I love to hear that. So I just wanted to share something interesting, or a thought that I think will keep us a little bit hopeful. So, one of the things that I've tried to do in my career is try and connect many of the ideas talked about in forums such as this into the political system, so they can start thinking bigger and much more broadly about what are the important things we're going to need to do as a society globally. And when you kind of interact with the political system, especially here in the United States, you find that it's sometimes just this brick wall that you're running up against over and over and over again. But what I find, really, inspiring about what's happening here and some of the other stuff that I have seen online is that, we are starting to see a movement where people are starting to say, hey, some of these ideas are actually practical and we could, envision the world with new eyes. And so one of the things that I've worked on for the last couple of years is trying to make universal basic income a reality. So one of the campaigns I worked with was Andrew Yang's campaign. And one of the things we noticed quite a bit was, at least in the early days, is that, sometimes people would kind of not take us seriously, or, it would be impossible to get 7 people in a room to even listen to this guy. And now we're in a position where people are taking it much more seriously. And now I hear the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, talking about guaranteed income being a policy solution she's looking to implement at some point in time, or is looking to explore, I should say. So, but that is actually a huge gain from where we were before. I mean, from where we were before in 2017 to where we are in 2020 shows that there is great movement that can be made in the political system. It is not as quick as one would like, but it is still possible. So I think that an institution like the Foresight Institute really has a great role to play here, and especially all of you people have a great role to play here, and keep trying to push people who have political leadership to think differently about the world.
Thank you so much for sharing. You should definitely join our salon in the 3rd week. How can current unusual openings in policies, for example, Trump's UBI proposal or the release of non-violent prisoners, be used to promote rational national and international policies? It's quite a mouthful, but there we're actually going to talk specifically about loopholes in politics that have been opened and that we could maybe push for more on a national and international level. Okay, great. Yeah, awesome. I shared the spreadsheet here in the chat. I mean, like, one thing, just to piggyback on that, when we talked about release of non-violent prisoners, right? Like, that's the other thing that we're hopefully going to tackle in that session. But it's kind of like insane, those openings. I remember when there was a while ago that it was quite clear that a few countries have released a lot of prisoners, and that was, I think, oh my god, maybe 6 weeks ago or something, maybe even longer. And I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. All of those people that are non-violent and for like totally abstract reasons are coming out now and are not kind of in cages anymore. And then I was like, well, but this would never happen in the US. They would never be able to kind of like rightfully decide and rationally decide who gets to go or not. Then a few weeks later, here we are, and it's happening. Meanwhile, a few days later, the BOP rolls it back and says, no, it's actually not happening. So like, it is kind of it is currently this unique opportunity by which it seems that the Department of Justice is actually behind releasing non-violent prisoners, much more so because currently a lot of states' death rates and a lot of state sickness rates of COVID-19 are largely in prisons. So the DOJ is actually behind releasing a lot of them. Meanwhile, the BOP is just blatantly not implementing it and is kind of like really spreading fake news on their websites about how the conditions are. And there is currently this power battle between the two going on to some extent. And it does seem like a really good time to be pushing for more rational action here, because there's a lot of things moving. And this is only, the UBI thing that you mentioned, this current thing that you mentioned, those are 2 things, and they're happening in front of our eyes. It's a crazy kind of like power struggle. And I think, it's a really good time to nudge it in one or the other direction. If those are only 2 things, if you have more of those items where you're like, oh my God, a small action could move a mountain here, please email me or put it in the chat now, because that would be a perfect thing to talk about in that session. Okay, there must be more things under the radar that we're just not seeing, right? Okay, great. All right, so someone is asking what is happening with the chats. The chats are all uploaded to the cloud as well, and we haven't shared them yet so far, because usually we try to use the collaborative notes doc. If people are interested in those, I'm definitely going to preserve them for now, and then I will talk in the Google group about how we handle the chats. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for joining. It was really, really fantastic. Thank you so much for making the time to come. This video should be out very soon, and I will check back in with the speakers to send me their follow-ups so I can send them out to you in the Google group. This is definitely the time when you should be joining the Google group. If you haven't done so yet, scroll all the way up in the chat, and there's a link that Lou posted, which I'm going to repost here. If you're not in the Google group, this is the main point of contact, so please, please, please join that. Okay, thank you so much for joining. I see many of you tomorrow, where we're going to talk about specifically celebrating specific heroes and what rituals can we form on an international level to to remember this day, this time appropriately, and to spawn more cooperative action globally, and to kind of like have like a little bit of a coming into being moment for humanity. All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining. This was fantastic, and we're going to be in contact via the mailing list. Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely day.